Hi everyone, Jeremy here from Video Studio, and today I'll show you how to create a smooth photo carousel animation in Davinci Resolve. You'll learn the core technique so you can customize it to fit your project perfectly. First, we'll set up the background to create space for the photos, then we'll build the animated carousel layout, and finally, I'll share a few tips to make it look even better. So if you're ready, let's check it out. So we are in Davinci Resolve right now. I have a piece of footage in my timeline. It's a 24 FPS timeline, and I would like to start to build my carousel. I would like to have it here on the left side. The issue is that there is that person on the left side, and it would be basically cut out by the picture. The picture will obstruct the person. If I try to move here to the side, the footage, I have some dead space here, but it's not very elegant. We have like a clear cutout here between the footage and then the dead space. So we're gonna create our own little background to just do a nicer version of this. I'm just gonna double click on that to reset it. And here, rather than creating a new Fusion clip right directly on the footage, what we're gonna do is we're gonna drag directly a new Fusion composition above that footage. It's gonna make sense later on. And basically, we want to be able to have the carousel above our video clip. That way we can use multiple video clip below it if we want to. I'll explain that further later on in the video. So now we can just select our Fusion composition and we can move over to Fusion. Now the issue, as you see, is that right now there is absolutely nothing. We don't even have a starting point, a media in one. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna hit Shift Space on my keyboard and I'm gonna search for media and I'm gonna bring a media in. I'm gonna then link that media in one to the media out. Right now, as you can see, it's red and there is nothing showing up because it doesn't actually know what that media is or where to fetch it. So we're gonna switch here the media source from timeline to background. And what that's going to do is simply indicate to Davinci Resolve that footage that it needs to fetch is actually the one that is below the Fusion composition. So basically the background of the Fusion composition. In that case, that's going to be that footage. But here, if I were to bring another clip, let's say I'm bringing that in, and now we're going back to Fusion, as you can see, it's this clip being displayed. And if I'm just scroll at the beginning, right now we're having our first clip. So that's why we've created a Fusion composition above the clip and not directly onto the clip. Now let's move back to Fusion and start to create our background. So the first thing that I want to do is here, I want to displace that footage. So we're gonna hit Shift Space on our keyboard and we're gonna search for a transform node and bring that in. This is gonna allow us basically to move our footage around. So here we're gonna displace it to about that, I think, but you can then readjust it later on depending on your footage. Now we're gonna go over to the inspector and then here in the edges, we're gonna switch that from Canva to either duplicate or mirror. It depends on the type of footage that you have. Sometimes duplicate might be better, sometimes mirror might be better, sometimes wrap might be better. Just play around with the different blending mode to have just something that is nice to your eyes. Right now, I think mirror work quite well because here it just extends a little bit the landscape. But for example, if you have another character or if there is something distracting, you might be better off trying another of those options. But you'll see it's not gonna matter as much because right now we're gonna add a gradient on top of it and we're gonna blur things out. So now I'm gonna bring here a background. So I'm just gonna bring it here in my workspace and I'm gonna link that background to the transform. Then I'm gonna select that background and I'm gonna click here on the rectangle mask to apply a mask to it. Now in the inspector in center, I want to select the X center at 0 to just move it here to the left side. Then we're gonna extend the height. And then here you can play around with the width to cover whatever needs to be covered. So here I'm gonna go about a third, I think, of the frame to give enough space for the picture to be displayed. You can adjust that again later on. Then we're gonna feather the edges. So here I'm gonna go to soft edge and we're gonna increase that to have a soft edge. And then finally, I'm gonna go over to my merge and then here in the blend, I'm gonna switch that from 1 to 0.8. So here, as you can see, we started to have something that can kind of hold our picture. We moved the footage over, and then we have that black space that can allow our picture to pop out a little bit more. But sometimes that might be confusing. This footage is pretty uniform, but if you have a lot of stuff, that might be distracting. So we're gonna add another element to it, which is a blur. So here I'm gonna select my media in, my transform. I'm gonna move them slightly over to give some space here for a new node. I'm gonna select the transform, hit shift space on my keyboard and search for Gaussian blur. Right now it's affecting the entirety of my clip, but if I take the output of the rectangle and I apply that to the Gaussian blur, as you can see now, it's living only within the first mask that we've created. If I toggle here the view of the mask, as you can see, it's only that area that has been affected, not the rest of our footage. I'm gonna switch it back here to the view of the media out. And now if we want, we can adjust the overall blur of that effect. I'm not gonna go too high with it, but depending on how distracting your footage is, you might want to just increase that a bit more. Right now, I'm gonna do 0.5. That should be enough for what we have right now. And that's pretty much it. We have now our background. We're gonna animate that later as soon as we have our photo layout, because we might need to adjust a bit the space and give less or more space for the picture to be displayed properly. So now let's move on to the next part and start with the photo display. So to make the photo carousel, obviously you need to have a selection of pictures. So here I've selected a few pictures of mine. I've made sure that they are all about the same format. I'll choose something vertical, so Instagram post-like, but they have slightly different dimension for some of them because they've been taken with maybe different camera, maybe that different export setting, different cropping, etc. So I want to make sure, if that's the case, that everything got the same format, because it's going to make things a lot easier to lay things out. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to I love images, and then here I'm going to select resize image. It's a very cool website that allows you to convert, resize, crop images very easily, and you can do that for a lot of images all at once. So here I'm gonna select images. I'm gonna just bring my folder and I'm gonna bring all the images that I've selected and drag them in. So here, as you can see, they have like different scale. I'm gonna choose the one that is predominant here. So that's 3200 to 4000. So I'm gonna do the width at 3200, and then I'm gonna do the height at 4000. Here, I'm gonna make sure to untick maintain aspect ratio, because otherwise you might end up with slightly different number. And right now I want to have everything basically with the same format. I'm gonna resize the images and download everything. All right, so now we have all images that have been converted properly. I'm gonna start by dragging a few, and we're gonna start to build a layout. So here I'm gonna take 3 of them, and we're gonna start to lay them out. So let's start by here linking my media in to the merge to bring that image inside of my timeline. As you can see right now, it's getting outside of all frame. So we're gonna resize it using a transform node. So here I'm just gonna select the media into, hit shift space on my keyboard and search for a transform node and bring that in. We're gonna then reduce the overall size of our image, and we're gonna place it wherever we want to place it. So here I'm gonna put it to the side right there. Maybe I'm gonna make it slightly smaller, and here we go. I'm happy with that. Now I would like to make those corner more rounded. Right now they are like straight corner. To do that, I'm gonna select the media into, and I'm gonna click on the rectangle mask. As you can see, that rectangle mask kind of like cropped our image. So what we're gonna do is here go to the width, and for the width we're gonna go all the way to 1, and I'm gonna do the same thing here with the height and bring it all the way to 1. That way it's gonna cover our entire image, and then we can adjust the corner radius, and we have now the mask being applied to the image. So the corner radius, I'm not gonna just go too crazy with that. I might just do 0.1. Now, basically, we're gonna repeat that process for all of our images inside of the carousel. Right now, let's just do it for those 3 images for now. I'm gonna just copy my transform. I'm gonna paste it and then paste it here. I'm gonna link those media to the transforms, and then we're gonna link the transforms to our main timeline. Now, same thing here for the corner. I'm gonna link now our mask to the different picture. And here we go. We now have 3 images placed properly. And now we're gonna be able to adjust the position of each of those images independently from each other. For clarity, I'm gonna remove all those images from the main branch. And also because in the future, we're gonna apply a few effects to that branch specifically. So here I'm going to select everything, then hold Shift and then drag that above to remove it from the main timeline. Then we're going to take the output of our merge and we're going to relink it back to the main timeline. That way, any effect that we apply right here in between this merge 2.3 and the merge 2.4 gonna be only affecting the image and not the background that we created prior. Now, the only thing is that right now our image don't have a canvas. So what we need to do is simply bring here a background, link that background here to our merge, and then we're gonna reduce the alpha channel down to 0. Basically, right now we've created a separated branch where our photo gonna live that is independent from the background and the footage that we have below it. All right, so now let's arrange the photo as we want. So the first thing is that I want to have here photos on the bottom and on the top. So the first one, I'm gonna just drag it outside of the screen. So I'm gonna bring here a photo down and I'm just gonna leave a slight gap between the two pictures. This picture is never gonna be shown. It's simply to just show continuity in the carousel. Then we have our second picture that is actually behind this one. And then we have the third picture, which is this one that we're gonna move above right here into the same thing, leaving a gap in between. Right now, I know that the gap is about 0.05 because we started at 0.5 and now we're at 0.95, which means that, if I were to go to 1, our picture will be off screen. So right now, basically, the difference is about 0.05 anyway. So I'm gonna try to take that into account when I'm gonna displace each image from one another. Right now, I'm gonna select my merge, hit Shift space and search for another transform and bring that in. And basically that's what's gonna allow us to create the animation for carousel. Now, if I do some adjustment here with the position, as you can see, we can slide from one picture to the other. So right now, I'm just gonna add a few more pictures. I'm gonna open my folder and then I'm gonna just select a few more. You can just make your organization here if you want to have like one appearing before the other, so on and so forth. Right now, I'm just gonna select it a bit randomly. I'm gonna copy my transform and I'm gonna paste it. I'm gonna link the media to it and then I'm gonna link the transform to the merge. Now, obviously, we're not gonna be able to see everything on screen all at once. So we're gonna need to play around with that transform here to just slide all the image down so that we can adjust it. So right now, I've just slide everything over and now we're gonna just move that transform to place it properly. So I'm gonna just adjust that. And I can now recognize the pattern for the gap. So for example, as you can see here, we started at 0.5 for this image, then we had 0.95, and then here we had 1.4, which means that each image has been displaced by 4.5. So that's what I'm gonna do forward for all those images. So I'm gonna copy my transform, I'm gonna paste it, and then here we're gonna add 4.5. So that's gonna be 8.5. Then I'm gonna copy it again, I'm gonna paste it, and then here, same thing, we're gonna add 4.5. And you can continue that process for as many images as you need to add to the carousel. Now I'm linking everything together. So I'm gonna take my mask and I'm gonna attach that to every image that I have. I'm gonna do the same thing here with the image to the transform. And then for the transform to the merge. Now, if I go to my last transform right here, as you can see now, we can just scroll between all the images that we've imported. And that's what we're going to use to create our animation. So now that we have the layout, I'm just going to make a slight modification to the background so it's taking a bit more space. So I'm going to go back to my background, then here take my rectangle, and I'm going to extend my rectangle slightly like so. I'm going to do the same here with my transform, and I'm just going to move my footage a little bit more like that. So now let's get on with the animation. I'm going to switch my view here to the merge 2, which is the view of only my background and my footage. And we're gonna make the animation here on about less than a second. So we're gonna say about 15 frames. Now, I'm not gonna do the animation directly on that transform because I want to be able to adjust that transform later on if we need to adjust the footage. So what I'm gonna do is simply here, go to the media in one, select Shift space and bring another transform in. And that's where we're gonna do our animation. So now I'm gonna drop a keyframe at the 15th frame. And then here we're gonna go to 0 and I'm gonna place that center back to 0.5. 0.5. So basically now we have the footage being displaced from left to right. Now we're gonna put an animation on the blur. So right now the blur is at 0.5 at the 15th frame. So we're gonna go 15 frame, 0.5, and then we're gonna go to 0. And then here we're gonna put the strength down to 0. And now lastly, we're gonna have our opacity. So here I'm gonna go to the merge, but for this one, I'm gonna start it a bit further. So let's say here, frame 6, I'm gonna put here the blend down to 0. And then I'm going back to frame 15 and I'm gonna put the blend to 0.8. Now, if we play it, the animation is not very nice and not very smooth. We're gonna need to adjust some stuff in the spline editor. So here I'm gonna make my inspector shrink to give some space right there, and I'm gonna select my spline. Then I'm gonna toggle on the transform, the Gaussian, and the merge. We're gonna click zoom to fit. I'm gonna select then all my point, and we're gonna hit the letter S on our keyboard to just smooth out those curves. And then I'm gonna hit the letter T to bring the ease in and ease out. And we're gonna adjust here the ease in to go up to about, let's say 85. Now that we have our animated background, we're gonna animate the layout. So I'm gonna switch the view from the background all the way here to our media out so we can see our picture again. Then here, we're gonna go over to the transform 3 and I'm gonna add 3 nodes, a transform, a Gaussian blur, and a brightness and contrast node to create the animation in for our picture. So let's select transform 3 and then hit shift space on our keyboard. I'm gonna bring a transform, then I'm gonna hit shift space again. I'm gonna bring a Gaussian blur, and then I'm gonna hit shift space again, and I'm gonna bring a brightness and contrast node. Now we know that the background animation is ending here around frame 15. So I want my animation to start slightly before that. So we're gonna say, let's say frame number 10. And I want that animation to be 1 second. So because we're working on the 24 FPS timeline, that means we're gonna end at frame number 34. So where the animation ends, at frame 34, I want the transform position size to be at 1, which is the final size of the image. Then the Gaussian blur, I want it to be at 0. So I'm gonna bring that strength down to 0 and put a keyframe on it. And then the brightness and contrast, meaning we're using that gain here as opacity. I'm going to toggle here the alpha channel, and I want the gain to be on 1, meaning that the opacity is full. Right now, if I reduce that, as you can see here, the gain is reducing the opacity. Right now, I want that to be at 1. That way, the image is fully visible on screen. Now, I'm going to go to frame 10, and this time we want the size to be reduced. So here we could do, for example, 0.9. Another thing is right now it's gonna pop up from the center. I don't want that. I want the pop-up to be in the middle of the image. So I'm gonna adjust here the pivot point to have it being in the middle of the image. That way, when it's gonna size up, as you can see, it's gonna size up from the center of the image, not here from the center of the frame. Now for the Gaussian blur, I want the Gaussian blur at frame 10 to be at, let's say, 0.5. And then here I want the brightness and contrast node to have the gain at 0. That way, the photo is not appearing on screen. Again, now we have our full animation. We still need to adjust it so it's smooth. To do that, we're going to do the same process as we've done before by going over to the spline editor. This time, we're going to remove our transform, our Gaussian, and our merge, which were used to animate the background. And we're going to focus only on the transform, the Gaussian 2, and the brightness and contrast node. I'm going to click zoom to fit. Then we're going to select here all our keyframe. Hit S on our keyboard, then increase the ease in here to about 85 again. All right, so now that we've created our animation in, we're gonna create the continuous animation to go from one image to the other. To do that, we're gonna use here the transform 3 that is right after all our images. Basically, by adjusting here the center position, we're able to shuffle through in between each of the images. So here I'm gonna set my starting point. So I want basically, as I told you, to have already one images down below and one images popping here at the top. To kind of shuffle between images and know that there is some like that came before and some that gonna come after. Right now our animation in is finished at frame 34, so we want to give it at least 1 second for people to see the picture. So we're gonna move 1 second forward, so that's going to be frame 56. Then here we're going to start the continuous animation. So I'm going to drop a keyframe on the position, and then we're going to move another second forward. So that's going to be frame number 80 to have our animation happening. So we're going to make here the switch of position. Then we want that picture to be displayed for another second before switching to the other one. So we're going to move another second forward to frame 104. And then here, we're just going to add 1 to our current position. That way it's not drifting off between the two. If you want it to drift off, just increase that slightly. I'm going to click then zoom to fit, and I'm going to select my two first keyframe, hit S, and then easy and add 85 like usual to have like a smooth transition. And then we want to select all our keyframe, and this time click set relative. That's gonna allow us to basically replicate that animation over and over again without having to keyframe it manually. So now if we play it, as you can see, we have the image coming in, and now the image is sliding to the next one, to the next one, so on and so forth. So now that we have our final composition, I'm gonna share with you a few techniques to just add a bit of flair to your carousel. You may decide to not use them, but if you want to use them, here are a few tips that I think can make it look a bit cooler. So the first thing is going to be to use an outline and a drop shadow. To do that, I'm going to select here my brightness and contrast node at the end of the photo composition. And then I'm going to select shift space on my keyboard, and we're going to search for drop shadow, and we're going to just bring that in. We're going to use that drop shadow as a contour. So basically I'm going to switch here from black to white. Then here I want to have the drop angle being at 0, and then I want the drop distance to be at 0 as well. Then we're gonna reduce the overall blur strength. That way we're just gonna contain a bit more that drop shadow to have it basically only contouring the image. You can then play around with the blur and play around with the shadow strength to basically get the look that you want. In my case, I just want to have a slight outline, so I'm gonna reduce the blur quite a lot because I don't want to be too diffuse. So I'm gonna reduce it about 0.3, and then I'm gonna play around with the overall strength. So here, I'm gonna say maybe 0.8, something like that. It's a small detail, and right now it doesn't show up too much when you have something with a white background, but for example, as soon as you get something that is a bit darker, it can really help the picture to stand out a little bit. Right now, actually, the strength is a bit too much for me, so I'm going to reduce the strength slightly, for example, here on those darker picture, and I'm going to reduce the blur slightly as well. So finally, right now, I landed on shadow strength at 0.5 and the blur at 0.35, but basically adjust it to your taste. Then we're going to add an actual drop shadow. So I'm going to select shift space, and we're going to bring another drop shadow in. Basically, right now, we don't see too much because the background is already very, very dark. But for example, what we could do is simply go back here to our background. I'm going to go back to the merge, which we're controlling the opacity. Then I'm going to go here to where I've put some animation. So that was the 15th frame. And then here, I'm going to adjust the blend to have it being a bit more transparent. So let's say here, we're going to do 0.5 instead. Well, now you can see the drop shadow a bit more, and I think it can really help to create a bit more depth. So here, as you can see, as I remove the shadow strength and increase the shadow strength, it just creates more definition with the shape of the photos, and that can be just like an interesting element to give more depth to your composition. So here I'm gonna adjust the drop angle, I'm gonna adjust the drop distance to bring it either further or closer to the image. So here I'm gonna bring it slightly closer. I'm gonna decrease the blur a little bit, so we have a bit more the shape of the picture rather than just a big blurry background. And then one last thing that you can do if you don't mind to have your image slightly distorted is to add a lens distortion. I think it helped to just like give a more 3D effect to the overall composition. So I'm going to select here my transform 3 at the end of all my images. I'm going to hit shift space on my keyboard and search for the lens distortion. Here, if you want to see a bit more what you're doing, you can select the output distortion map, and that basically going to show you what you're doing right here. As you creating that distortion, it shows you how it's affecting the overall frame. Right now, I'm just going to guess it a bit more and see how it's affecting my shapes. So you can play around with the distortion, the curvature X and the curvature Y to really create what you want. Right now, I'm going to try to just do only the X at the beginning, and it basically give it like some sort of like barrel feel, you know, when they are gonna switch between one another, it's like giving an interesting feel to it. I think it kind of like depends what you try to display. If you try to display, images that you've taken, maybe it's not the best, but if you try to display like references, that might be an interesting thing. So here you can also play around with the overall distortion of that. And yeah, I just think that it could be like a useful effect to give a bit more flair to the overall carousel. And that's pretty much it. I hope this video was helpful. It was a long one, but I really wanted to try to explain in detail how to do things if you're a beginner. If you watched the video until the end, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Let me know in a comment if you would like me to try to figure out a way to make this a preset so we can add it to the free starter pack. By the way, if you haven't downloaded the free starter pack, please make sure to do so. It's a pack that contains over 150 assets for Davinci Resolve that is available for free. You can download it as the link in the description below. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Speed up your workflow and create better videos using the pack available on our website, including titles, transition, and templates built only for Davinci Resolve. Get started today by downloading our free starter pack that contains over 150 elements. Link in the description below or at videoeditorstudio.com.